really good to be here again and good to see you. I know I met some of you last week. As Annie said, I work in the field of domestic abuse. I used to work with Ollie, that's how we got to know each other. And I now help manage a domestic abuse service in London, as well as delivering freelance training and consultancy. My real passion is that survivors of abuse receive effective and compassionate responses the first time they reach out. And I'm really grateful, sorry Joel, I'm fiddling because I want to be able to see everyone, not see a microphone. I'm really, really grateful to Annie and Ollie for inviting me to speak and to open up this conversation about abuse and about our responses as individuals and as a church. So last week we looked at what domestic abuse is and why it's important for all of us to engage. And today we're exploring a bit more about God's response and what that means for our response to abuse. If you weren't here last week, I'd really encourage you to go back and have a listen to the audio, because what we're speaking about today really builds on those concepts that we introduced last week. I'm aware, therefore, that this is a big ears topic, and I'm aware there's a few younger ears in the room. I'm not against them staying in the room. I think it's really important we talk about these things with the next generation, but I'm aware that we want to do that kindly and safely and age appropriately. So if you want to step them out at any point, that's fine. As before, the material that I'm covering today is not comfortable or easy listening, and I'm conscious that there's likely people here where this is particularly pertinent or sensitive for you. My hope is that in talking about it, we all grow in awareness and understanding in order that we better respond. Whether that's responding to ourselves with kindness and gentleness and that grace that Ollie spoke of as a survivor. Whether it's responding to ourselves with challenge and accountability as someone who's using abusive behaviours. Or whether it's being better ready to respond with compassion and effective help to those who might disclose to us. So that in mind, I'm aware that I'm touching on all kinds of abuse and trauma that you might have experienced, or that those you love and care about may have experienced, and I recognise the emotional impact that has. You're welcome to respond to that in any way you need this morning. If that means taking a break, you're welcome to. If you step outside of the room, someone will come and check in. If it means closing your eyes and switching off for a bit, or putting on some music, you are in control, and my encouragement this morning is to prioritise and care for yourself. And if you don't have that control, if it's not safe for you to respond in the way that you need, there's cards on the seats, and if we all pull them out, they've got suggestions of organisations that might be helpful to speak to, or perhaps speak to a trusted friend or to Ollie and Annie. And on the other side of those cards is a grounding exercise. It's a different one to last week. And as I said last week, I'm not in any way suggesting that this is the answer to abuse. But by engaging our senses, touch, smell, hearing, taste, sight, or concentrating on our breathing, the breath that God has given us, it can help in those moments when a sense of overwhelm might be rising. I also want to acknowledge that I stand here today in the footprints of so many that have gone before. I mentioned last week the work of Helen Painter, Elaine Storkey and Natalie Collins, and this morning I add to that list Janelle Aldred and Kirsty Cobb, and so many more who I've learnt from and who have influenced me and whose voices are echoed in what I bring this morning. But we ended last week looking at the first few verses of Psalm 23, thinking about God as our shepherd, our protector from evil and our guide on the way to go. We talked about sheep only lying down in those green pastures when they feel safe enough, content and nourished, and how that is what God wants for us. And we spoke about how God knows what we need and his provision of the quiet waters. I want to start today looking at the last verse. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, And that word goodness in the original text is the same word used as when God created the world, looked at what he'd made and saw that it was good. That is the goodness that God pursues you with. And the word here used for love is the word hesed. The idea of a covenant commitment, a loyal love. That is the love that God pursues us with. And while our versions often say that goodness and love will follow us, a closer rendering might be that to say that they chase us or they pursue us. So surely your goodness, the good with which you viewed creation, and your love, God's covenantal, committed, loyal love, they will pursue you all the days of your life. And I long for you to know that goodness and love pursuing you and spilling over in your life. But what does that mean when you're hurting? When you're lost? When you've experienced abuse? What does it mean when you've been brave enough to share it with someone and perhaps they've not been able to hear it or not responded in the way you expected and hoped for? What does it mean if God or the Bible has been used as a weapon against you? If passages of scripture have been taken out of context to coerce and control? What does it mean when the church promised to help but didn't? What does it mean if reaching out for help from the church made it worse? Restored's research that we touched on last week found that 35% of those experiencing abuse who sought help from their church felt that by doing so had caused them to be less safe. On the whole, I don't think churches ever intend that, but perhaps by not recognising their own judgments and biases, perhaps by not having a thorough understanding of the dynamics of abuse, perhaps by not believing or hoping that if they don't acknowledge it, it might go away. Perhaps out of good intentions, or perhaps out of ignorance, or perhaps out of fear of scandal and wanting to protect an institution. We have to acknowledge that the church, both individual churches and the whole church movement, hasn't always responded well and hasn't always been that safe refuge. Let's pray for a moment. God, to think about it hurts. To acknowledge the depths of abuse that are occurring in your name leads us to anger and rage and weeping and mourning. May it also lead us to the foot of your cross, to that place where you were harmed and hurt, where those who loved you betrayed you, those who you had a right to expect loyalty from abandoned you, where you experienced nakedness and humiliation, and where you cried out, God, why have you forsaken me? And so I thank you for the solidarity of that place and that survivors of abuse are not alone. And then in 2 Chronicles you say, if my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. God, have mercy on your church. Help us learn. Help us do better. God, I thank you for Bright Hope, for the openness to talking about this, for the opportunity to explore what a better response might look like. Lord, would you take my words today and have your way with them? Would these words sow seeds of life and hope, of dignity and value, of compassion and justice. And Lord, I long for all to know your safe refuge, that whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty, that we can all say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Amen. I also want to acknowledge that today is not about becoming experts. Sometimes a little knowledge becomes dangerous, and in trying to be helpful, we can cause more harm. So my biggest piece of advice and encouragement today is to keep learning, keep questioning, keep aware. Often we don't know what we don't know. So use the experts, use the organisations on that card, whether local or national, or Restored, the organisation that Bright Hope is partnered with as a beacon church, who provides support and guidance to survivors. So my first takeaway is do no harm. Be aware of what you don't know and be aware of the specialist support that is available. And a little nod here to that desire to jump in and rescue. Often when we discover that someone we know, someone we care about is experiencing abuse, we want to jump in, we want to stop it, we want them to be free from it. But in doing so, sometimes we make the assumption that we know best. And we might not. So listen, believe, ask what sort of support that person might like, and empower them to live their life, to make the choices that they want to make, and to make any changes at their pace. We talked last week about that farming advice in Leviticus, that when harvesting, leave the edges of the field in order that those who don't have the means to pay can go and harvest that food themselves. God intends a society that's oriented to providing for the weak and oppressed. It also wasn't a handout. They went to harvest the edge of the fields themselves. There's a dignity that's offered. So allow survivors to make their choices in their timing, without judgment. We also talked last week about separation, and where sometimes there can be an instinct in church to encourage someone to stay in their abusive relationship, to forgive, perhaps to seek relationship help. There is a world of difference between marriage difficulties and a dynamic of abuse. Domestic abuse is not a relationship issue, it is an abuse issue. In Jeremiah 6, there's a word of warning to prophets ignoring an incoming threat. It says, they dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. So don't do that. Don't sweep over or minimise what might be really quite dangerous for someone. Listen, believe, and help them access specialist support. Do no harm. And my second point is to do something. Do something, whether that's to pray, to give financially to the work of Restored or one of the other organisations on the cards, whether it's learning more, perhaps reading one of the books I've mentioned, or the blog on Restored's website, or joining me later this week for a deeper dive into coercive control. Perhaps you might consider volunteering for a local organisation supporting survivors. Maybe you could make up welcome packs for those arriving at local refuges. Maybe as someone experiencing abuse, you're doing something is that courageous step of talking to someone, of sharing what's going on, perhaps of seeking support from one of the organisations on the card. Maybe your step is recognising what you're experiencing as abuse. I often talk about helping survivors gently hold up a mirror to see what's going on, where perhaps you've normalised or minimised as a way of coping, a way of surviving, a way of getting through the day. So perhaps for some it's about recognising that this is abuse and figuring out what that means for your next steps. As I've mentioned, Restored is a great organisation to support you with that journey. They've written a handbook for survivors, there's a couple of copies at the back, and they also have a blog on their website. Perhaps you're doing something is recognising that it's not your fault. When you've gotten so good at blaming yourself or accepting the blame that's piled on you. Abusers are responsible for their words and actions. So maybe for you, it's learning to lift off some of that self-blame and shame. I can't remember where I first heard this, but there's a quote about domestic abuse being an unwritten rule book of constantly changing expectations. That no matter how you twist and contort your life to try to meet the different demands, try and keep the peace, an abuser will always find some reason or some excuse to blame or pick fault. They are responsible for their actions. And that twisting and contorting to meet somebody else's needs is not the life God has for you. Goodness and love pursue you. Or perhaps you're doing something is recognizing that your own behaviours and actions are abusive and recognizing how they've caused harm to others. So maybe your next step is speaking to Ollie or contacting Respect, who provide meaningful opportunities to change for those who abuse. Their details are on the cards as well. But don't leave here and carry on. Do something. And my third takeaway is to consider the power that we hold as individuals and as church, and how we harness that power. As we saw recently across the streets of London, a strong horse can be a beautiful sight of strength and dignity. A strong horse can also stampede and cause injury. Power itself is not the problem, how power is used and harnessed. So where is power in the Bible? God is all-powerful. Again and again we are told about God's strength. We sing, don't we, about how God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing that he cannot do. And yet where is that power placed? Scripture shows us again and again God on the side of the weak and the marginalised, giving power to those who perhaps society would keep powerless. We look at Luke 7, at the woman who poured perfume over Jesus' feet. Life was fairly public in those days, so having different people wandering in and out of the house isn't surprising. But what that woman did was scandalous. It was extravagant. And that in itself would have invited questions about the nature of her relationship with Jesus. Massaging his feet, weeping over them, drying them with her hair. This was intimate, suggestive even. And you can imagine the shock and the mutterings around that dinner table. We're told that the host said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Of course Jesus knew, but he refused to take advantage. He used his power to offer dignity and worth. Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. He used his power to offer dignity and worth. The Bible also shows us that power is for giving away. Jesus is arguably the most powerful man to have ever walked this earth, and yet he didn't keep that power for himself. We see with the disciples, Jesus pouring into them, teaching, passing on wisdom, sending them out to do the miraculous. He wasn't keeping his power to himself. In John 14, he told them, you will do even greater things than what you've seen me do. And at the beginning of Acts, the disciples remember Jesus' words to wait for the gift my Father has promised. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. He gives his power away. Harnessing power does not mean being meek and mild. We see across the Bible examples of God's anger and rage. What is his anger addressed to? Injustice. And in the New Testament as well, we see examples of Jesus showing that rage. And what made him angry? when matters of justice were neglected. In Matthew 21 and Mark 11, we have accounts of Jesus throwing over the tables in the temple, a statement of righteous anger, and it made an impact. Sometimes we need to be righteously angry on behalf of victims, to say, in this moment, I will not see this happening. Like Jesus said, no more in this house will we see this behaviour. Jesus is very clear what is unacceptable. He doesn't skirt around it, and nor should we. In Psalm 140, we have words of such encouragement to survivors. Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent, who devise evil plans in their hearts and stir up war every day. They make their tongues as sharp as serpents. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Keep me safe, Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Protect me from the violent, who devise ways to trap my feet. The arrogant have hidden a snare for me. They've spread out the cords of their net and have set traps for me along my path. I say to the Lord, you are my God. Hear, Lord, my cry for mercy. Sovereign Lord, my strong deliverer, you shield my head in the day of battle. Do not grant the wicked their desires, Lord. Do not let their plans succeed. Those who surround me proudly rear their heads. May the mischief of their lips engulf them. May burning coals fall on them. May they be thrown into the fire, into miry pits never to rise. May slanderers not be established in the land. May disaster hunt down the violent. I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy. Surely the righteous will praise your name, and the upright will live in your presence. In Harnessing Power Well, God is not saying anything goes. He will bring justice. And harnessing power well also means calling out abuse. Last week we talked about that logo of the Beacon Church being that lighthouse. And what do lighthouses do? They shine light on the danger. They highlight where the danger is. In Matthew 26, in the garden before Jesus' crucifixion, Judas betrays him with a kiss, and the crowd arrest Jesus. In that moment, Peter uses his sword to defend Jesus. He was defending a leader, defending someone he trusted in a moment of unfairness and injustice. Yet Jesus chose to make clear in that moment that friends are not exempt. You might be my best friend, but if you behave badly, I will call you out. And he did that in front of everybody, so that everyone knew that Jesus' kingdom, Jesus' message, is a message of fairness and justice. Let's also consider for a moment how power influences the way we see people, and look at how Jesus sees people. In John 4, we meet a woman at a well. Life hasn't been easy for her. We're told later that she's been married 5 times and is now living with a sick man. We don't know whether she's been divorced or widowed, and we can only wonder at the choice that she might have had in any of those marriages. She's coming to the well in the middle of the day when the rest of the village were likely resting, when there's not the usual hubbub of chatter as women collected water for the day. So we can assume that this woman didn't feel she belonged or was accepted in order to join the others at the well. I wonder what she was thinking as she approached that well and saw a lone man there. As Helen Painter puts it, she needed to go there for water. There were probably no alternatives. There was no one within earshot. And in any case, if she were to be raped, they'd probably only blame her. But this man wants nothing more from her than a cup of water. And miraculously, what he has to offer her, living water, has no strings or agendas attached. She is a woman who has been known many times. But here is a man who knows her intimately and does not objectify her. He sees her history and loves her purely. He doesn't leer, he doesn't make innuendos, he doesn't make smutty jokes after with his mates. She is safer with him than she could be anywhere else on earth. Jesus used his power to offer life. So how do we do that? To use our power to bring life and hope. I'd say start with taking away whatever has spoken to you this morning and sit with it. It's so easy to be impacted in this building and then walk out and be thinking about the food shop or dropping the kids off or whatever you want to achieve this afternoon. But I encourage you, linger in the thoughts you've had this morning. Allow them to permeate. Wrestle with the things you're not sure about. Reflect on the things that have challenged you. Whether it's to do no harm, to recognise that you're not an expert, to use specialist support and advice. Perhaps it's to do something, to find out local needs, donate, volunteer, pray. Perhaps doing something is keeping learning, keeping questioning. Perhaps you're doing something is seeking support for your own experiences. Or perhaps it's thinking about the power that you have and how you harness it. Consider whether there's ways that you are holding on to power when it could be given away, or ways that you are exerting that power that look quite different from the model we have in Jesus. And in Exodus, Moses asks God what he's like. The first thing God talks about is his compassion. Across chapter 3, we see God recognizing and acknowledging the oppression of the Israelites. And his response is to say, "My people, I see you, I hear you, I know you. I will bring you into a land flowing with milk and honey." So for those caught in oppression, those who are experiencing abuse, God sees you. He hears your cry. He knows your affliction. He promises to bring you into a land flowing with milk and honey. A land flowing with all the good things. Coming back to where we started today, goodness and love will pursue you. We're going to play a song over us in a moment, which reminds us of those verses, of goodness and love following us. We'll play it once over us and have some time for reflection, for God to meet you where you're at. To perhaps think over something we've spoken about this morning, or think about what your next step might be. And if you pop your hand up, someone will come and pray with you. I'm going to stand at the back so we can see those hands. And then afterwards, we're going to play the song a second time. And if you'd like to, I really encourage you to join in, to sing it either as a testimony of what you have known in your life, or sing it as a prayer for what you hope will come. Goodness and love will pursue you.